I would love to introduce everyone to our next speaker. So, David, if you'd please like to turn on your video so everyone can see you. David Hill is well known to many of you as a lecturer and an organiser of those famous field meetings that were held at Bristol University Field Centre. These were ran together with Brian Coppins and provided BLS members with an opportunity to discover lichens with their microscopes. David is incredibly generous with his time and his knowledge and is a field worker of mainly man-made places. And today he is going to provide an introduction to the remarkable habitats that are a truly treasured aspect of our natural environment, and these are our British churchyards. So David, over to you.
Thank you very much, April. I'm gonna just share my screen, if I can sort that out for you. And then pop up my presentation.
Brilliant, David. That's worked perfectly. Thank you.
Okay?
Yep.
Right, off we go. Well, this is a very different kind of habitat to what most people are probably used to going into the wilds. It's very domestic. Just round the corner we find churchyards in most of the villages we live in. So here we go. Just to give you a picture of the size of the number of records we've got of lichens from churchyards, we've got about 500,000 records of lichens from churchyards. Well, there are up to about 20,000 different churchyards and cemeteries in England and Wales, and we've got about nearly 13,000 of them visited. Approximately 1,000 taxa have been recorded from the churchyards, and it represents about 40% of the total number of species. We've got the most commonly recorded species here, a list of Candelaria vitellina, Lecanora dispersa, Verrucaria nigrescens, Calopleca flavescens, and Lecanora campestris. These are species very well known to lichenologists visiting churchyards, but of course there are many others. The average number of species that we might get in a churchyard is way above the number we've actually got in records. But then when people record lichens churchyards, they're not always got the skills to identify everything that's there. We've got about 10 species that have only ever been recorded in churchyards in Britain, and 5 of those being lichens and 5 being lichenicolous fungi. Where should we go today? Now, this is a virtual field trip, so we need to go somewhere. So I've got 1 or 2 sites we could just pop into to have a quick look. And I'm just going to take you to round the corner here and where I live. I went there just a few days ago to see what lichens we've got there. It's a kind of literally virtual field trip. We get the church itself and we get the gravestones, and here's a gravestone to be seen. Now, this is the sort of thing we might see today. It's not probably the kind of thing you would like to see when you want to identify in the field, because they're all wet at this time of the year. Now, thinking of Rosie Oniger's talk about how the thallus changes when it gets moist. This is Acarospora fuscata and how it might look when it's actually in the business of really growing and photosynthesizing, quite different to how we might identify it. And then we've got here, excuse me, Aspergillia calcarea doing its job now. You can see it's slightly greenish and not just white, with the little algal cells showing through there. You've got another Aspergillia contorta with these little buttons, and 1 or 2 of them with apothecia. 1 there with apothecia. And then we've got here Bagliatoa, or what we used to call Verrucaria calcicida, with the little perithecia poking out. And this one here, Bilimbalus sabulatorum, growing on moss here. The moss is growing on, and the thallus and the little apothecia there. And then we've got Buellia ethelea, which looks rather sort of miserable, but you can see the little apothecia coming up now here, rather miserable when it's dry, but here it is growing And it's a very crusty business looking at churchyards, you'll spot. We don't have very many foliose lichens or fruticose lichens, but just here's a one which is placodioid, Calopleca aurantia, growing away, looking rather different as it does when it's wet. And Calopleca dicroa, the two different colours of the thalli nicely showing there. And then Calopleca flavescens. Now this is what lichens don't like. They don't like a water film growing all over them. The bottle garden effect that Rosie was talking about is operational here, and you can see the green algae, but the diffusion of gases in and out of that's really, really hard through that water film. So this thing is really in a pretty miserable state like that, and it wants to get into more sort of moist condition without having liquid water. Calopleca saxicula, which some of you are very familiar with, looking here with all its loads and loads of apothecia bursting out, firing off spores. And this is another well, I call them Caloplecas. I know they have new genera, but I'm sorry, I'm still using the old names. Pardon me for that. Calopleca tricolita, which is looks quite different again when it's moist. And Candelaria vitellina, one of the most commonly recorded species, growing away. They're looking green again. And this one, I've done a lot of work with this particular species, and this is Diploisa canescens. And here, this species hates being wet. It likes to be moist, just with the dampness. It only will grow on vertical surfaces. And when I looked at the growth rate, it was only correlated with the humidity of the air and had no correlation at all with rainfall. So this species, it really specializes in growing by being moist. And I think a lot of lichens are like that. And I think rainfall is often a misunderstood variable in looking at lichen function. I think humidity of the air is far more important in most species. And here's Lecanora campestris, again looking rather different when it's wet like that than when it is dry. Lecanora rupicola, we find every now and again in a sterile state without any apothecia present, growing isolated. Being an outbreeder, it does need another one around to make apothecia. And here's Lecanora sulfurea. Again, you wouldn't recognize it necessarily if you're used to seeing it dry. And as for Leptogium pulvinatum, I mean, look at that, just a squidge of jelly. And Placopyrenium, is this Placopyrenium or is it Verica nigrescens that's been browsed? Look at those lovely browse marks, see how beautifully they show. This was a lump of thallus sticking right up, so pretty sure it's Placopyrenium vaxellum. And then you've got Polysporina simplex, which is tiny little shriveled up black bits of stuff in between the grains of the rock when it's dry. But when it's moist, the whole thing comes to life, and it looks quite extraordinary. These purpley brown circular apothecia are quite confusing to those people who are used to seeing it when it's dry. And the Rhizocarpum reductum, a very familiar species to everybody who goes to churchyards. Here, looking rather different. Tephramila atra, now the very common churchyard species. Tinea aromatica, again a very common species, and there's Vericaria nigrescens. So we've actually done quite a lot of looking at churchyards in Britain, and one of the things I had the good fortune to do, I'm sorry about the layout of some of these slides, but I've had to move platforms for this presentation, and a lot of my design had sort of didn't carry across. One of the questions, is it worth going up the church tower? What happens when you go up a church tower when you're looking for lichens? I was fortunate enough to be able to go up this tower because it was covered in scaffolding, and did one or two sort of simple measurements. The cover of lichens above the ground up the tower, it was very much higher at the top than at the bottom, and there are a few more species up at the top as well. So it's possible it's worth actually going up the tower to see what species you are. Well, let's go off to let's go off to Hawkesbury Upton. This is another churchyard right next where I live, next to a village. And again, I had the good fortune to be able to go up there when the tower was in scaffolding. I had actually previously surveyed the churchyard and found 85 species on Saxicola species on the church and the gravestones. I wanted to know what happened if you went up the tower and see what we could do to add to them. So up we went, and here we are, looking for the lichens, my notebook, and lens, and all the different species. Found lots of Xanthorrheas, Caloplacas, and various other species. And I just sort of point out that one of the things that I spotted was that this, I know it's not called Caloplaca anymore, but anyway, Caloplaca decipiens is in this part of Britain is often found at the top of towers, but not down in the rest of the rest of the churchyard. Here, of course, we have Lichenicolous fungi as well. Here's Telegala growing on Xanthorrhea, forming these nice little galls. And there are all sorts of other things. You know, when we look at churchyards, we look at the tiniest things. That's why we get so many species. This thing is absolutely minute, just a fraction of a millimetre across those apothecia. And the question is, what is it? Well, it was a species of Gialecta, and I think possibly Gialecta transigena. It seemed to be more like that than Gienensis, but it is very difficult to tell the difference when it's like in that form. This species is normally grown on trees, but it will very occasionally grow on rock. Anyway, the outcome is, going up the tower, I was able to add 16 more species. So the total number of Saxicola species in the churchyard there has risen up to over 100, which is a pretty good list for a small area like that. What about going on to Badminton now? Let's have a quick look at Badminton. Here we have 2 visits. This tiny little church with quite a large churchyard. We found over 100 species here, including the ones on the trees. Here we go, various different species, Calemas, Cladonias. But on the woods seat, now this is a different habitat. And strangely, in this particular churchyard, the Saxicola species growing on the wood, on the lignum. Sonopsera candicans and Chrysanthium nigrum growing quite happily on wood. I've never seen that before myself, and various Calemas as well. So it's amazing what you find. You find all sorts of funny, odd things do turn up. And another one just near here in this churchyard. I was looking around, here comes the Stereocolon, which it's turned out to be Dactyphyllum, and it's another dot in this map of the species. It's just unexpected. I've never seen it before in a churchyard. And in Lullington, in Somerset, not far away, a species of endocarpon turned up, which we still cannot identify. It is a species which we put into a group of specimens that have turned up under the name Endocarpon polygulum. I found it in an island just in the Bristol Channel before as well, and we just don't know quite what it is yet. It's a difficult one, that. And one of the things that's turned up, half the records in Britain of this unusual species of, sorry about the presentation, not being able to get it to display properly in this format, was Petractis nodispora, which was first described by Alan Orange about 10 or more years ago. And this is a thallus with little pinpricks over it, which you can see the tiny little pinpricks, which are Pycnidia, Trentipolia, Photobiont. And in the pinpricks, it produces conidia, which are multicellular in a form of a little cluster of cells like that, quite unique. And it's quite a difficult thing to identify, because when you dig this thing out, this is all you get. And quite often you can't see what's there at all. And it takes a little bit of this disentangling what you're looking at to spot these amazing pycnidia from here. And that's a fairly recent thing in Britain that people have probably overlooked. I'm sure it's much more abundant on limestone gravestones. And similarly, there's another one that looks rather similar, which has an amazing pycnidia, which like cigar-shaped, 3 septate cigar-shaped conidia. Again, it looks a bit similar. This has never been found in a churchyard, but I'm sure it'll turn up. It's always worth looking for the new. So Diplotomahedini is another one that's turned up. It looks just like elbow atrium. but it grows mainly on horizontal surfaces rather than vertical surfaces, and that has been found quite a lot. But I think again it's very widely overlooked.
2 minutes,
Now, there are
David, if
various
that's
other
okay.
aspects. Yeah, I'm going to stop there. But there are various other aspects we can look at the as to whether it's worth looking at the age of the stones and all that kind of thing. And I'll pause at that particular point. Thank you. That's given you a bit of an idea, I hope.
David, that's absolutely fantastic, and all those beautiful pictures of the spores as well as the lichens, that will make everybody go out and have a look. So we've got some questions coming in, and the first thing that came up was everybody asking, what sort of camera are you using for these gorgeous pictures of churchyard lichens? So I think you better answer that first.
I use an Olympus Tough. Olympus Tough camera. It doesn't cost much, and it does 6 shots, which it then stacks automatically in the image. So you just take a photograph, it automatically stacks them, and then gives you a picture, which increases the depth of field. It's so quick. I just nipped out and just did a few, just for a few minutes. I popped into the Hillsley Churchyard to take those images of what they're like when they're wet. I'm sorry, they're not actually very good photos, but I wanted to have them immediate, as you might see them if you were with me today to go out. Actually, it's snowing outside, so you're probably glad not to be here.
Yes, it is here too. It seems to be snowing everywhere. But David, yes, because the stacking is really important, because it gives you a depth of field, doesn't it? So
yeah, that's right.
Those cameras that have stacking are really important. Now they're all rolling in, these questions. So here from James Floyd, do you find a strong correlation between the lichen flora on gravestones and the great variety of stone types sometimes present?
Yes. So that one of the great advantages of looking in churchyards in southern Britain is that each churchyard has a variety of different, major different stone types that gravestones are made out of. There's the various limestones. Around here we have oolitic limestone, but you have carboniferous, hard carboniferous limestone. They have slightly different floras. We have sandstones of different kinds, some calcareous, some very acidic. You have granites. So that the enormous diversity of over 100 species we're getting in some of these churchyards is due to the fact that there is this wide variety of different stone types, each one having its own sort of unique flora.
I think that's really special about the British churchyards, which is often different from the continent. But one more question from Meg Cathcart James, who says, thank you for a fantastic talk. Do you find very different communities on gravestones in rural and urban churchyards?
Well, yes, I think that tends to be true. The point about going up St. Stephen's Church tower was that it's in the middle of Bath and in the middle of the city, and the reason why the cover of lichens is so much lower at the bottom is because it's within the blanket of air pollution trapped by the houses around. And the whole point about going up a tower is that you're moving away from the above house or above tree level and into different air types. And you only need to see across the sea in a clear day to see the layers of air across the horizon of how air, when you go up a few hundred feet, can be completely different to what it is down at ground level. And I think this is a very important aspect of lichen ecology is how high you are up, and if you poke up through this sort of, not a boundary layer as such, but it's a kind of blanket, a layer that covers the ground that's trapped by trees and buildings and other things.
So there's a lot of other comments, but how are we running on time, April?
Probably one last question before lunch.
Yeah, I think the people are interested also in you recording Solenoptera obstracandicans on wood. I am too. Gosh, I can't. And Placentium nigrum. It's very strange, David. Any more comments on that?
Well, no, it's just that it's amazing when you keep going looking at the habitat like churchyards and over again, odd things seem to turn up. You know, they're species that people overlooked. In fact, the funny thing was that one of the best colonies of the lichen Batractis nodispora that I found was one where Alan Orange had done an enormous lot of lichen work on it in that churchyard before he had actually discovered it in the species in Wales. So it was probably there, but he never saw it because it's so easy to overlook these little tiny things.
Yes.
And
yes. And are they in that particular situation of you finding it on wood? Did you find them on stones around that area?
No, I don't think we did. No, I mean it's strange, isn't it? I mean every churchyard has its own sort of environment which the whole churchyard's in. And then, of course, you've got the different microhabitats within the churchyard. And unless the conditions suit, that species won't be there. And it's surprising when going to numerous churchyards, not just what you do find, but what you don't find. However hard you look, are just not there.
Yeah. So interesting. And David, you're going to have to look at these questions because there's somebody doing a lichen project for PhD, and so I think you need to answer that yourself.
Okay.
She's doing urban burial grounds. So